But this, of course, being the live program Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1. Just before I introduce Autry, let me give out the numbers: 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. Autry is the CEO of New Journey Political Action Committee, dedicated to exposing the lies and misdeeds of the political elite in the Democratic Party. He's the author of Planes, Steak, and Water, Defending Donald J. Trump. And his written works have appeared at the American Spectator, Breitbart, Daily Caller, Forbes. You know, he's a true, as to use the modern term, an influencer. Autry, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me on board. I'm glad we're able to finally connect.
All right. So listen, I think that in this particular election, Donald J. Trump doubled his African-American vote, both among men and women, I may add. And also across the board, people of color, like here in Massachusetts, he did better in Boston, where I am, by 2%, but he did better by 10% in cities like Lawrence and Fall River and Holyoke, which have very high Hispanic populations. And I think that what we saw happening in this election, and it probably may have even happened more had there not been, shall we say, improprieties. We don't want to talk specifically. This is YouTube, and I don't want to be banned. Is that Trump virtually doubled his minority vote, and that his outreach to minority community, plus his policies, which have benefited the minority community in the area of a choice for public schools and enterprise zones and pro-family, these policies were starting to make an inroad in the culture in the Black community, wouldn't you say?
Yes, they were, and more importantly, Trump was willing to engage, right? So the problem with the Republican Party in general is that they haven't willing to be engaged on the ground. And I'm talking about everything, not just about politics, but about everything. But Trump himself as a person, because he employed construction workers, because he employed a lot of African Americans and minorities in general, he was willing and comfortable engaging. One of the things that happened in Georgia, if I may pat myself on the back, I warned about this, is that the Republicans didn't engage. So you went into Atlanta. I know we all hate Warnock, right? But we went into Atlanta, a place where there's a Black church. And we tried to tell a community that the Black pastor, who has been feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, clothing those that don't have clothes in the back, helping prisoners come out of prison and not go back. We're trying to convince those Black folks that he's a bad guy. That can't happen unless you have a relationship too. Am I going to trust him, who's helped put food on my table, or am I going to trust you in DC, who's only taking money from my pockets? So the Republican Party mistakenly aligned themselves and thought that they too could ride a Trump wave with African Americans, and they couldn't. And so that's what Trump was able to do. And in a large way, President Trump was able to increase and hold up just himself, the Black vote for himself, and lost some of the white mother vote, we say, or the suburban white female vote.
He did.
So that's sort of the dichotomy here. But if Republicans want to come back in, if Republicans want to win elections, right? Because this thing that identity politics doesn't work, that's gone. We didn't fight that battle, and so now we've lost it. Mm-hmm. So now we have to fight on their field. So what we need to do, what Republicans have to do, is they have to be there and actually engage. I'm not talking about slick ads, direct mail campaigns, snapping your fingers. I'm not talking about diamond and silk. I'm talking about actually be there on the ground, help people, engage people, and then in 2 years or 4 years, they'll have more of an open ear because you've been there.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, they need to go in and actually go, as Lyndon Johnson used to say, you have to press the flesh. You have to go in and bat people, meet people, go to events, show your face, get involved. And Trump absolutely did that. I mean, before Trump is descended from the famous elevator at Trump Towers, he was a cultural icon of the Black community, given all the awards of Jesse Jackson, the Reverend, Al Sharpton, all of those guys had Trump over, had Trump over to parties, and they were giving him awards, and he was, even appeared in rap songs. He was a
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you. I said that Trump, other than other rappers, Trump was the celebrity that appeared the most in hip hop and Black hip hop songs, right?
Now, all of a sudden, though, the minute he stepped in that elevator, he suddenly became a white supremacist and a racist. And
wait.
Yeah,
it didn't happen right away. Remember,
okay,
he comes down the escalator. They do ramp up a campaign, but right when he gets elected, he made a mistake. Actually, this was Trump's mistake. He then turned to Hollywood because that's what he knew. He didn't understand politics, so he said, "Okay, that was all fun and just." They thought they were like him, right? Oh, you're the most horrible person in the world. You're a loser. You're a dog. Oh, now we're best friends. The competition's over.
Mm-hmm.
He thought that was the case. So when he won, who did he invite? He invited Steve Harvey, Chris Rock, a bunch of Black celebrities. He even selected Omarosa, a celebrity, to run his outreach.
Right.
But that was a mistake because what he didn't understand was that the left progressive forces of Hollywood was going to put downward pressure on these Black celebrities to distance himself from Trump. Give you a great example. Steve Harvey, who's put out some crazy stuff about Trump, gave a speech to, I think it was Omega Phi, I believe that is the largest Black fraternity.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve Harvey said in that speech, listen, I proposed to Donald Trump that I wanted to do these vision centers, X, Y, and Z. Donald Trump said, okay, how much you need? Steve Harvey said, probably $6-7 million. Donald Trump immediately picked up the phone, called Ben Carson, Director of Housing and Urban Development, or the Secretary for Housing and Urban Development,
mm-hmm.
and said to him immediately, hey, Ben, get this done. And within 6 months, they had 2 or 3 centers around the United States. Steve Harvey actually told, it's on YouTube if they haven't suppressed it. Steve Harvey himself told that story. And so Steve Harvey was trying as hard as he could to pivot. But the problem is he hosts a Family Feud. He has his own TV show. And so they put downward pressure on him to distance himself from Trump. So in the very beginning, Trump was starting to make it, but Hollywood just brought too much pressure. They control the purse strings.
They do. And who are they? We're talking about predominantly white, upper class, top 1%er, left-wing, suburban, liberal types who despise any. First of all, they'll label anybody who's conservative or Republican as racist, which is a complete lie. But with Trump, it went into overdrive, mainly because he actually was doing things that threatened their power base and their political and cultural control over the Black community by making people question the wisdom of their being in that camp. And I think that he posed thus not only a political threat, but an existential threat to the entire left-wing endeavor that goes back to probably the 1960s when they started to basically cultivate that kind of support through massive public programs. And that therefore anybody who, Trump had to be branded as having something against Black men and women, which is a complete lie, as are anyone who supports him, including Black people. Mm-hmm. And that this has gotten to an absurd level now, even after he's out of office. Like, for example, this recent this game thing, this company that GameStop, where basically legitimate, investors who are not part of the Wall Street left-wing top 1% internationalist crowd, they figured out how to buy the stock and undo this shortstop system that they put in place where they're going to rip off a company and put it out of business. And so what happens? The New York Times comes along and says, oh, these people are white supremacists. Yeah. I mean, it had nothing to do with that. I mean, the word white supremacy has come to mean anybody who disagrees with Trump, anybody who is not on the left. is therefore to be labeled a white supremacist
Yeah,
and
I just was
destroyed.
told I'm a part of multicultural whiteness. That's what I heard just a few days ago. That I
Boy.
am a part of the multicultural whiteness. That it's
So they're questioning your blackness, basically.
You know, these individuals have the reason why these attacks are coming. It may not seem like it because the media's on their side, but they're losing.
Yes.
They're losing because eventually, after you're broke, mama's broke, grandmama's broke, and great grandmama's broke, and they've all supported the same group of crony politicians. They've all subscribed to the same newspapers and watched the same shows. Eventually, somebody comes along and says, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. So now what they have to try to do, the left has to try to do, is take a bunch of theories and try to over-explain what your lying eyes and your lying pocketbook have been telling you for years.
Right.
The Democrats are the party of making you more broke.
Okay, we're joined by Autry Pruitt. He is the CEO of New Journey PAC. Autry, it seems to me that we need to turn the tables a bit on their narrative that anybody that doesn't genuflect to the left has something against black men and women, and point out that it is their policies, particularly starting in the 1960s, that have so damaged the black community and people of color.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you take a look at their nationalization of welfare, for example. I mean, if welfare was done on a local level to people who are temporarily in trouble and need help through charities and through maybe some coordination with local business and local government, then it actually could address problems of poverty instead of this kind of like program that was put in place where everything becomes national and people are encouraged to get on these roles and women are encouraged to get rid of their men and then have more children out of wedlock. And this, you know, it was Patrick Moynihan under Lyndon Johnson who warned people that this would destroy. That's right. It would damage the black community, and he was right. It really did. And this is racist in the literal sense. I know that people who embrace this aren't necessarily thinking of themselves in that way, but the end result has been and is racist. They targeted the black community. They targeted the black church, starting with Margaret Sanger and her Negro Project, where they got black ministers. They paid them off to basically promote abortion in black communities. You know, they did it to black education by locking black kids in the inner city, once they had no fathers at home, into these rotten public schools where there would be taught behaviorism and look-say reading and other destructive methods that would damage their literacy and their ability to think. They damaged black business and entrepreneurialism, something that was going through the roof in the 60s, by starting with anti-business policies and driving out businesses and high taxes and regulation. And then they introduced drugs and we could get into some of that. That's maybe a little beyond what I should be talking about. But the point is that the left did terrible damage to the black community. In spite of that, black people have risen up and they've become entrepreneurs and they've entered the middle class and the upper classes. And, you know, but it's really not because of them. It's in spite of them. And now go ahead.
Oh, well, and the left, and what's crazy is now I'm taking, we heard just what you outlined, your taxonomy of the destruction of the left in the 60s. Now, let me move into the last 2 weeks. Keystone Pipeline put black folks out of work.
Oh, yeah, thousands.
Right?
Now you have a bunch of rotting pieces of a pipeline that are going to sit there collecting dust. And it's a gift to the oil companies because now the cost of oil is going to go up, which is going to hurt working people, and it's going to hurt, raise the prices. Right.
I mean, the Keystone Pipeline. Let's go back about 3-4 months and go to BLM. And as BLM and Antifa destroyed, forget about downtown Seattle, forget about
black neighborhoods,
the stores and the businesses, most of those that they blew up.
Yeah, talk about insurrections. They spent the whole summer looting black businesses, burning black neighborhoods, killing black people in Chicago and St. Louis. It's unprecedented numbers, including children.
You're right. And the liberal media only wanted to show you Gucci's and Chanel's and that stuff. They didn't show you the majority. If you go to our website, newjourneypac.org, and you look through all of our work, you'll see some of our commercials, and some of those commercials we highlight. There was one in particular where a lady's on her phone. She's crying because she has a baby, and she says, "Where am I supposed to go get food now? Where am I supposed to go eat?" You claim this was about Black Lives Matter, but it wasn't. There was another lady who owns a pizza store, a Black lady who owned a pizza shop, and she's going through her shop with what appears to be her daughter, and she says, "You lied. You lied. You said Black Lives Matter. Look at my store. Look at what you did to my store." That is the left. So I don't care if it's the 60s, every stage, every decade, starting, you can go back to Woodrow Wilson, but I won't go back that far. Let's start from the 60s, right, to the 70s left-wing progressive housing project that denied Black mortgages in the 70s, to the 80s, right, where the left wanted to pretend it was just Republicans. No. They lined up too to separate the difference between crack and powder cocaine and sentence disparity, right, to the 90s and the destruction of the Black church, to the early 2000s and the destruction of Black wealth because you wouldn't allow people to get into the market, to now. I mean, so the left is the center. Actually, I wouldn't say the center. They're the leader. They're the catalyst to every time Black people have had a pushback. Every time you can trace it back to someone on the left.
Now you have Black Lives Matter, which is predominantly a white suburban, just like we've talked about. You find, and by the way, most of the people in my neighborhood in Greater, I live in Boston, but I see these lily white.
Boston, by the way.
Thank you.
They have a new hotel there called the Encore at Bell Harbor, I believe.
Oh yeah,
I was just there for
right in the seaport
about a year ago.
What do you? Yeah, I mean, next time you're in town, drop me a note. But yeah, it's a great town. But you've got these lily white left-wing liberal suburbs where you have Black Lives Matter signs on their wealthy lawns, on their estates. And these people, it's just a euphemism for hating Trump. I mean, there's nothing to do with anything else. But the point I'm making here is that they don't really understand or know the actual nature of the Black Lives Matter organization, how radical it is, how much it, as you say, has damaged the Black community. But, and they ascribe to this nice sounding slogan. Of course, Black Lives Matter. I mean, it was like in the 1930s, you could have communist groups called Peace and Love, Apple Pie and Motherhood. Who's against that?
Yeah.
So it's propaganda. But the point is that they are advocating, and they were very successful at advocating last summer and right into the fall, the defunding of police departments around the country. Now, they made the case that the police departments and policemen need to be better trained in terms of how to function in the Black neighborhood. But they're missing one piece in that discussion, in which, and by the way, I think that's true. And Trump tried to do that with a bill that was rejected by the left-wing Democrats, by the way, because they don't want Trump to get credit. But the point is that there is a crime problem there. And the police are protecting the 99% of people who live there, who are trying to get to their jobs, trying to get their children to school safely. What are they, what about this business of then coming in and taking police away from those neighborhoods?
And what about asking? That was the thing for me. At no point did someone go into the neighborhoods and start talking to the voters and saying, hey, what do you feel about us removing the police from the streets? This one, what is like 1 mile block in Chicago where 333 murders happened in the previous year. What do you feel about us just saying, okay, cops, go home? Right? This is what's insane. This is what's insane. And that's why you have to be, circling back to what you said earlier. And Chris, I really commend you. I've done a lot of interviews. You are the only one so far. I don't even have them all up. I've done so many radio and TV interviews, Skype interviews, podcast. You are the only one who has said without my prompting, what you said today about being there, about speaking up, it's amazing. And part of that is because even on the conservative side of big conservative media,
right,
there's still stuff you can't say.
Well, You know, we have to do as Bill Clinton so accurately said, we have to have a national dialogue on race. You know, it's just that simple. And I mean that. Of course, I don't know if Clinton meant it, but that's, you know, he wanted to have a national dialogue on how the left can advance. But putting that aside, you know, here in Boston, Dan Lothian, who is a very respected reporter, is doing a special on WGBH where he's talking about racism in the Boston Police Department. And yeah, I guess that I'd ask you, Autry, do you see this as a major problem? And because he has people, you know, guest after guest, most of whom are black men, saying that they have always had a problem with getting stopped by police. They feel intimidated. They feel concerned. And I can sympathize with that. I mean, I don't want to have police, you know, abusing their powers against anybody. I mean, I'm sympathetic to that as a conservative. I don't like, you know, policemen are government officials essentially. And if they're abusing their power, we have to have something done about that. Of course, Dan Lothian is not talking at all about crime rates. He's simply talking about this particular phenomena. Is that a problem? Has that been a problem for you?
Well, for me personally, there have been some incidences. I've probably had just as many good incidents with police officers as I've bad. I think I've been stopped 4 times in my life, all by white police officers. Mm-hmm. 2 were just fine. 1 was a little suspect. That one I felt, I don't know if it was racial, but I definitely felt that the police officer was on a power trip. And by the way, if you spend any time, so I grew up with no money, right? So I grew up with no money, broke, busted, and disgusted. And I had a lot of white friends. I had black friends who I lived in a black neighborhood. And then we ended up moving to a different area to change schools, ironically enough. But I was still poor. And I ended up with a lot of white friends who were also poor. Mm-hmm. And what I found is that police officers, a lot of times what we're encountering as racism or what we're feeling from police officers is just a power trip by a person with a badge, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the reason why it feels, one, perception can become reality, right? So my grandmother, who by the way is, God rest her soul, was a great person, but she had some reservations about white people. My grandmother, born in the 1920s, she tells stories and recounts being slapped in the face in Alabama because she looked at a white woman the wrong way. I mean, so she carried with her some racial baggage.
Sure.
But I never forget one day we were driving along and someone cut her off, and he looked out the windows, this white guy, and I was little and I was like, oh, racist. And my grandmother looked over me and said, no, most of the time people are just a-holes. And that stuck with me because that's when I realized a lot of stuff we attribute to racism, even a lot of bad stuff we attribute to cops are on a power trip or they make you do this. I have found when you go talk to poor white people, for example, or poor Asians, that they pretty much say, yeah, they have problems.
It's a bad apple.
Because it's on a power trip. Now, what's the difference between the class? The difference between the class is, one, a police officer going into an upper class neighborhood acting a certain way knows that those people have the resources to make their life a little tough. That's one.
Yeah, they can't.
And then two, if you have resources, you're just looking to get through it. So you're like, yes, sir, no, sir. Okay, give me the ticket. You can pay the ticket. I can argue the ticket, and you're moving on, right? Because you got stuff to do. So a lot of times the things we subscribe to police aren't really race related. I believe they are, and the statistics bear this out even with shootings. They're not race related. They're just power trip related. Okay. I think in an advanced society, we need to rescreen how we do police officers, right? The military went through this. There was a point in the military when the army was just take anybody, take them. And so if you couldn't find any jobs, you couldn't do anything, you just went to the military. And then at some point, as the military advanced, as rules of engagement got more complicated, right, it became much more of a, okay, we're gonna change how the makeup of this looks. We're not taking anybody. You actually have to have some qualifications to get in. So I think with some police officers, we have to we have to do that. But I think most of the time, it's if you have an incident with a police officer, it's usually just because of their personal power trip, and they probably have that with everybody they meet, not just you because you're black.
No, right. And also, we cannot throw the baby with the bathwater in that, they are going out and risking their lives at times in high crime neighborhoods where you have drug gangs and you have people who are committing terrible, violent crimes. And they don't know if they're going to come back in one piece. I mean, it's like, it's easy. It's kind of like when you criticize people in the middle of a war and they're on a battlefield and there are snipers and they're frightened and there's stuff going on. You can't necessarily put yourself in that position to understand the nature of what they're dealing with. And I think that we need to do that.
You're right, Chris. And what do we do?
By the way, my name is Charles.
We send you off to combat, 6 months to 9 months. We bring you home after your tour, get you conditioned, relax, normal, and then maybe you can do another round again and come back and go out again. The deployments, right? So I am not a psychological expert in military planning or police planning, but I'm just looking at this logically, right? What my brain can put together. And so maybe I'm saying, maybe what we need to be doing is thinking about deployments, particularly in areas like high crime Chicago, high crime areas of Detroit, high crime areas of Birmingham, Alabama, right? Where you go out into that community 6 months, 9 months and deploy, right? And then you come out. So in a cases where, okay, this is a high gang area, this won't work for everywhere, but particular area like Chicago, having a cop there, I'm not giving an excuse to a cop that beats up or does something wrong. That's not an excuse. I'm just saying, if you are put in that situation for 4 or 5 years, you're working in the worst area in the city, can we be surprised that you become jaded to everyone you meet? Right.
Okay, New Journey PAC is the organization. Autry Pruitt is the CEO of New Journey PAC. It's a conservative outreach, particularly to the Black community. Autry, one of the first acts of President Biden as an executive order was to get rid of the 1776 Project, which was made up of a lot of solid scholars, including a lot of Black scholars, I may point out. And replace that with what had been there before, which is critical race theory. And this, I think, is a pretty significant cultural event because this document was, in a sense, there to guide public education on American history. And the critical race theory, I think, is something that's, to me, it seems anti-American, at least, if not outright racist. And it basically puts everybody in the country under a microscope and to find out whether or not they're racists. And, and it's very political in that it only targets people who are not on the left. They wouldn't put Biden under that microscope. They wouldn't put Kamala Harris under that microscope and see that she put 1,500 young Black men in prison at a time when she was answering to lobbyists who were trying to push for private prisons in California. No, it's only people like me, people who are conservative, because you were seen like in 1952 in a hotel room and David Duke was staying at that hotel. Or something, they'll find.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? I mean, and in a broad sense, what about, the basic premise there, which is white privilege?
Okay, so I'll address two things. The first thing is how we get there, how someone like Biden gets there, anybody gets there. One of the reasons we got to be conscious of education is because when you reach certain levels, right? I'm a CEO of an organization, Biden's president, you run your company, you then begin to rely on advisors. And your worldview becomes shaped by the fact that okay, these are expertise of people in their field. They've succeeded in their field. They've won accolades. They've won awards. And so I don't have time to read critical race theory for myself. So when they come to me and say, listen, this 1776 project is X, Y, and Z, critical race theory is academic, it's advancing, it's well-researched, there's a trust bought in there. And now academia has become a big, I was going to use a term called a circle blank, but I won't say that here. So, but it's becoming a round robin, right? It's everybody preaching to the choir. There we go. That's a nice
And also, there's a lot of money involved there. There's grants coming in from the Tide Foundation.
Research. Sure. So Biden is being influenced not by anything he's read himself. I doubt he's read critical race theory or even a summary of it.
I don't think he's read too much at all in recent months. Anyway,
in recent months, I really believe. And by the way, that's a whole nother. The bureaucracy of the legislature and why we get bad laws is a whole nother topic. But at any rate, so that's the issue. So that's the problem. So when you say, when I look at the notion of white, the way I look at the notion of white privilege, right? I look at it and say, this is poppycock, this is hogwash, this is something that it does not exist in the way that's framed on the left. That's the best way to say it.
Sure.
Right? Now you're going to make an argument. Now, if you wanted to say you have someone who is, you have a black male that's X, Y, and Z. You have a white male that's X, Y, Z, and they both walk into the job. Does that white male enjoy privilege over the black male? Well, intrinsically, what critical race theory would say is yes, or any of these theories on the left would say yes, automatically the white person. But what my theory says, it depends on who they're interviewing. If the person that's interviewing them is a racist, then right? Right. And the person in them has is biased, and yes. And then they want to argue that there's this implicit bias and stuff. The problem is that in everything there's implicit bias, right?
Right.
There's implicit bias in everywhere. So the question is, you got to be educated and just be aware of it. But the bottom line is, white privilege as a concept the left rolls out, I'm sorry, but it's like what Lil Wayne said, right? Lil Wayne, who, by the way, was just pardoned by the president, was interviewed by Piers Morgan some years ago, along with Morgan Freeman.
Mm-hmm.
And they were asked about
I've heard that, right.
And they said, you know what? You don't want to ask. And Morgan Freeman's a person on the left, by the way.
Sure.
They're like, you don't want to ask me that question. And you can't, you can't say it. You can't say, and it's not about picking some exceptions. In almost every single area, let's go to finance. Kenneth Chenault, black man, CEO of American Express. Go to manufacturing, Ursula M. Burns, CEO, black woman of Xerox. Turn to fast food industry, right? You had Don Thompson, who's the CEO of McDonald's. Obviously, turn to politics. You got Barack Obama, Herman Cain, me, other people, right?
Right.
So every facet you turn to, right? In
That's
every
right.
facet you turn. So to say that there's this built-in white privilege, it is absolutely crazy. Now, to say that there are one person out of 100 running a job that may have some racial issues, yes, because there's one person out of 100 running a job that has some issues with men, one person running a job that has some issues with women or Jews or Asians.
Sure.
I
would also,
racism.
I might even expand it a little bit and suggest that in these times, and maybe in the past, maybe since the 1970s, this is actually a golden age to be a black person in America if you want to succeed. And, the doors are a little bit more open. Colleges, businesses, professions.
Well, right now,
they want to have, if you're black and you want to become, go in and get a job and you have the qualifications, you have the door open a little more widely. People want that.
Let me disagree with you that. I'll bet you right now I cannot get a job at Apple, Google, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube.
That's interesting.
So if you're black,
well, I think that might have to
politics.
do it because you're conservative. Actually.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. That's exactly what that's.
So maybe I should qualify it by saying, if you're a black liberal in America today, hallelujah.
If you're black and neutral, if you're black and progressive.
Listen,
right. If you are 100% right, particularly, I'm going to go with the 90s. I don't know about I was born in 1979, so I'm not going to go with the 80s or 70s. I'm going to say since the 90s now, probably right since the 80s, but I'm going to say since the 90s. If you're black and you are engineered, you have higher degrees, you're talented, companies are looking for you.
That's right. That's right.
They're looking for you. And to be honest with you, if I wasn't, raise my conservatism, right? If I had a master's degree in engineering from MIT, you're white, you had a master's degree in engineering, male in MIT, and all else was equal, I actually might right now have a slight advantage over you if I went to Google versus you.
That's right. But of course, you're an open and unabashed Trump supporter.
So I have no.
And I'm in the same boat. I mean, I actually lost a job after Trump was elected because the boss came, brought me into the office at the time I was selling insurance and said, "Are you a Trump supporter?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And basically within the course of the conversation, he told me I'd have to work from home. And of course, then I couldn't really function anymore. And that happened in a few other situations. I mean, and now I think that now that President Trump has been removed from office, let's put it that way, I think the purge could become more severe and worse for people who are openly. I mean, now there's going to be enemies lists. If you listen to Sandy Ortiz in Congress and other people, they're developing enemies lists, and they're going to stop people. Harvard wants to rescind people's degrees who were part of the Trump administration or who were openly supporters of Trump. And it's almost like the Kulturkampf in.
I did not realize. I had not heard that yet. I did a show a couple years ago where I predicted. I said it's just a matter of time for the university to start to take away degrees. I didn't hear that. That's actually
I don't think they're actually. I mean, there's just a movement among students to advocate.
Just a movement among.
Yeah, they're not doing that, but they might.
It starts with that. That's where it starts.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, there are a lot of stuff that's going on that we never thought would happen.
Well, I'll tell you what they're going to do. Just like what they did with Alex Jones and the KKK people in the Daily Stormer, right? So you looked at the KKK and Daily Stormer. The left comes along and says, "Well, we don't want you on our platforms, and people like me." All right, that's what they're going to do. They're going to find someone like.
Well, they
Richard
find the
Spencer.
least desirable people, the ones that everybody dislikes.
It starts there. Richard Spencer, I believe, he is a white supremacist. He has a PhD or a JD or something from Yale. I think it's from Yale, one of these Ivy League schools.
Yeah,
he would be the target.
Oh,
they would say his
he's
views
the
are
least
so
desirable
person. So that we want to take away his degree. And if we allow that to happen, then it's game season. It's open season on everybody.
Well, yeah, and I think that's kind of what we're looking at, and a lot of the rationale that they're using, the raison d'etre, is this allegation that it had been Trump supporters who had essentially breached the U.S. Capitol and stopped the joint session of Congress, which is something that is a half-truth. It's sort of not proven, and I think that
even if it was, what the so because 100 lunatics. Let's just say I give it to them. Let's say I believe that this group was together and they were trying to take over the U.S. Right?
Yeah.
That was the insurrection. They were going to take over the U.S. Let's say I buy all of that. You mean to tell me if 100 or even 1,000 followers of one lunatic, 1,000 lunatics of one person that they follow is going to go and take over something or try to take over something, that makes the whole class of people the same way?
Well, I mean, look, there were almost 1 million people in Washington, and they were mostly families and people of all ethnic backgrounds who were there simply asking that the election be.
You're right. Not to mention, it's been proven that the thing at the Capitol started before Trump even started speaking.
Well, think about the idiocy of that whole charge, anyways. That Trump would have sent in this guy with the fuzzy hat and the bull and the buffalo wings, and he's going to take over the government so that Trump can remain president. I mean, that's idiotic. It's asinine.
And listen, it is absolutely horrible that people lost their lives because of this.
Of course.
Some police officers are traumatized. I just read about a second suicide. It's from a cop who was there. Obviously, the media is trying to spin it that it's because of what happened there is the reason why he committed suicide. We don't know that, right? But any of those, the 6 lives now lost, are assuming that they're lost because of events there. That's what I'm assuming. At least 2 of them are. That's tragic, obviously. But to say that everybody is.
Well, we also have evidence that some of the people involved, at least, were part of Antifa dressed in Trump
like the one black guy who did the Uber commercial, the black guy who does a national commercial for Uber, who is known activist for BLM, was there in the Capitol.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Sullivan.
Yeah, I mean,
that's right.
This is insane.
And there were others now coming out, and I think that hopefully we'll get some kind of an honest FBI investigation. I don't know if we will, but ultimately, I think it's a bit of a rush to judgment in terms of who this is, and it fits conveniently into a narrative. Not to mention that it hurt President Trump because they stopped the joint session of Congress, which was about to examine the questions of voter impropriety, and they now are not going to do that. So we'll never get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, listen, what they did was a mistake, but to label this as a known insurrection to overthrow a government is like you said, yeah. Colored faces, bare hats, a couple guys running around with no latex gloves, no spy equipment. I think only one person had a weapon, and he wasn't even inside the Capitol. I'm not sure, right?
Right, and plus they didn't really damage. I mean, there wasn't like major looting or damage of property. I mean, they basically strolled through they showed them strolling through the hallways.
And to me, what was the most disgusting thing was every single day for 7 or 8 months, people in these big cities and urban areas of New York, Chicago, even now Chicago, they live in terror. Imagine this, the Black grandmother in Chicago, that's all she can afford to be is that downtown heavy traffic area of Chicago. Her neighbor was killed by a bullet. How you claim Lindsey Graham, Nancy Pelosi, how these folks claim they felt. Those other people are going through every single day.
We should ask them
how the hell? What is that's my problem. I had this conversation with one of our vendors. She was writing a letter on behalf, and I tore a new one because I said, because she's in DC, and she said, "Oh my God, this is this." And I said, "Don't cry to me about this stuff. Because if you were so concerned, that's how you are about the elite and yourself, and you knew they weren't going to do anything because the military, the service was right there to stop them. So it was just a matter of them not being preemptively there. But you knew that even if they would have managed to take over, that wouldn't have lasted.
Right.
It wouldn't have lasted. Right. Were they going to go down there and take folks hostage? No. And what really upsets me is that they have all this talk, 20,000 National Guard, right? 20,000 National Guard in DC. How many National Guard in Chicago right now in these areas where people are being killed? I just read about another little girl shot dead in her house by a stray bullet. Mm-hmm. You had the girl at the funeral killed. 2 kids shot. A father was carrying his girl in his arms, killed in his arms. This is crazy to me. You put 20,000 troops in DC and you can't put 1 troop in in Chicago.
Yeah.
Or Atlanta for that matter. That's just right. Crazy.
It's exactly right.
That's why I said I don't want to hear people like, oh, I don't want to hear anything about Capitol insurrection from these guys. I don't want them to talk about how scared they were. That's all BS. You're in Christian Louis Vuitton shoes. You're in $3,000 suits, Rolexes, down there huddled with the Secret Service. You're scared. The first thing you should have done is came up and said, hey, guess what? I had a small sliver of a taste what it's like to be in Chicago. We're now authorizing troops to go into Chicago and stop this mess.
Yeah, or at least we're going to support our police. But so, Autry, where are we going from here now that we have the new administration installed?
Downhill.
Yeah, well, all right. I mean, but I mean, in terms of race relations, I totally agree with you on that. But we have an instance. We have the powerful are now back in place. They've taken power away from the people. They've gone back to the internationalists and the big Wall Street crowd and the free traders.
The Robin Hood, yeah.
They're right, exactly. They're going to basically go back to the old days. It's like nothing has changed, and they're going back to their doctrine of claiming everyone's a white supremacist who isn't agreeing with them. The ways all of this crap. So what can we do? What
we should do, and what the solution is this. We need to forget about the national level, like I said in slick commercials like before. What we need to do is get on the ground and engage, right? One of the biggest places we're separated is in the church. We're segregated a lot in the church, right? So if you are a member or a pastor or a deacon or something in a predominantly white church, what you should do is find a partnership with a Christian church like Jesus Baptist churches on both sides, right? Find one, or Pentecostal, whatever, Methodist. Find a partnership with the other and exchange Sundays, right? Switch off.
That's a great idea.
Start coordinating because you have a basis, right? You're Christians. Don't start with a political basis. That's the problem. Start where you agree, so you have a basis. that's the first thing to do, is to consciously go to the other camp and say, hey, I'm just here to fellowship with you. If we can, and I said the church because it's the easiest thing to do, right?
Although as a little caveat, most of the white churches are controlled by left-wingers, but putting that aside.
Well, but that's when you get to the bigger churches, right? When you go into these smaller churches, by that I mean like 1,500 people or less, when you go to these smaller churches, it still tends to be a little bit more traditional, right?
Sure.
So if you're a member, if you're a member, you're conservative, you're a member of this church, your church is most likely still more traditional in Christian belief. You can find other black churches that believe that way. Kojic, for example, is a great is an example of that. And get a partnership with that church. Talk to your pastor about saying, okay, let's exchange pastors for a day, right? Let's do that. Let's exchange choirs. Let's have a third of the church go there and just begin to talk and interact and fellowship. Then when these issues of importance come around, right, then you'll have an open ear because you have a common base to deal with.
Sure. Great idea. Great place to start. A good solid exchange. And I think that you've mentioned in your literature that ultimately and more fundamentally, particularly, Black people are more conservative. They believe in God, they believe in family, they believe in conservative values. And that has to be emphasized, I think, amongst in that community. I think that here in Boston we have Ayanna Pressley elected to the House. She's about as radical and as far left as anyone in the House.
Yeah, I was actually surprised because I'm familiar a little bit with Boston, and
well, she was elected because she's Black. I'm sorry to say that, but and she was therefore promoted by the Boston Globe and by all the white left-wing establishment. And now she's given a certain aura of hero status. She can't be touched. And people aren't paying attention to what she's doing. She voted against humanitarian aid to children coming over the border undocumented in Texas because she thought it might make Trump look good. If she had, and that passed, by the way, but if she had her way, you would have had terrible, inhumane conditions continuing. We don't hear about that now because it did pass and because people have been helped. But yet nobody in the neighborhood in Boston understands this. It's all so assumed.
I don't know if they understand. Well, that's your area, but I'd be curious to believe, do they not understand it or they choose not to understand it? Selective ignorance.
I think it's selective ignorance, and I think it's a media blackout on these things by the left, most predominantly white establishment in Boston.
Well, you're in the crater. You are in the crater. You are in what I call the progressive academic corridor there.
That's right. these are people who have agendas and who are really determined to white out of existence anybody like me.
White out. That's what basically. That's a great term.
Yes, it is.
White out. The progressive. Until Republicans realize that you have two battles to fight. The first one is not really a fighting battle. It's you need to engage others, even young people, whatever it is, right? Those that don't traditionally see themselves, you need to engage. Right? You need to engage them. That's the first thing you need to do. And you did it with the Hispanic community in Florida. That's why Trump was able to carry Florida by such a large margin.
Right.
So you need to engage. And then the second thing is internally, you need to start being a little bit more Democrats and tell like the 10 people that voted for impeachment, say, listen, yes, you have your morals, you have your principles, but that's horse crap. All right. If you're either with us or you're against us, and clearly you're against us, so you should resign and go to the other side. That should be it.
No,
there should be no tolerance for that kind of dissension.
The other thing I try to urge people to do at this time is run for local office. And when I say local, I mean local state rep, local state senator, local city council, because these offices can be won on very little money and very, if you're a housewife, if you're a teenager, you're retired, you're an empty nester, you have a little time on your hands, go out and run for one of these offices. You might find out that the incumbent had been there for 20 years and never been opposed. And that if there's something we learned from this election, it's that state legislators have power, and that
Yeah.
they abrogated their power to regulate elections in 4 states, which is one of the reasons. I mean, we can't go
Yeah.
too far on this because I might get banned, but let's just say that power was taken away from those legislators in a manner that is constitutionally questionable, and taken over by corrupt governors and secretaries of state who then just made laws as they wanted to help their candidate.
School board is a great example of that. Right? A lot of this problem has started in schools. Run for local office, get to know your community, run there, shake hands there, do that on the groundwork, right, locally. And then you can maneuver your way. By the way, you can maneuver your way towards national office, right? But start there. Plus, to be honest with you, if you run for local office, you'll get a better sense and feel of where the problem areas are, right? Where they are in your local community for the leftist onslaught.
Exactly. And the thing is that even if you don't win, and you might be surprised how you could win, you're going to get a few issues knocked over the plate. The media will have to cover it.
Mm-hmm.
You will get interviewed, and you will. It's almost a civic obligation. I mean, look, I ran for Congress myself, so I mean, I'm speaking from experience. That it's an exhilarating experience. You get to bring up a few issues you care about, and you get them introduced into the public fabric, and people start to think about them. So, anyways, Autry Pruitt, I want to thank you for joining me. Please let my viewers and listeners know where they can find out more about you and your organization, or anything else you'd like to share.
Yeah, so go to newjourneypac.org. That's newjourneypac.org. If you click on people, you can see the wonderful staff that works for us there. It's such a great staff, and you'll be surprised the diversity and age and race. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Gender diversity. So go to newjourneypac.org. You can read all about us there. Look up our work. When you're there, click on our work and see we produced 50. Now I think we're up to 55. But we produced 53 commercials during the election cycle with like
Excellent.
10% of the budget the big organizations have, right?
Oh,
that should tell you something about the RNC's budgets right there.
Right.
You can look me personally up at my name, autrypruitt.com. So just go to newjourneypac.com, look us up, and donate, give.
By all means. That way maybe you could take on the Lincoln Project.
That's right. We actually are working on something.
Oh, that's good. Okay, I hope so. Autry, let's stay in touch. Please drop me a note from time to time. I'd like to have you back as a regular, and we can keep keeping on in these times. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
All right.